We were in Bible study this week, and we were studying the passage that I'm going to be preaching from today, which is the book of Revelations. If you've got a Bible, I invite you to open it, or if it's on your device, I invite you to open your app. Revelation chapter 2, beginning with verse 8. Anyway, we were in Bible study, and one of the scholars in attendance said, you know, every other lesson that you taught from this scripture you taught from, I knew where you were going with it. I have no idea where you're going with this lesson today. Let's see if you have any more luck figuring out where we're going to be going with this. Revelation chapter 2, begin with verse 8. Jesus, speaking through the evangelist John, says this. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of the first and the last, who was dead, and he came to life. I know your affliction and your poverty, even though you are rich. I know the slander on the part of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Beware, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison so that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have affliction. But be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Whoever conquers will not be harmed by the second death. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Amen. Thanks be to God. There are many ways to die. There are lots of ways to die. According to a list published by the World Health Organization, an organization which is funded in part by the United Nations, and they keep statistics on all sorts of data. This just happens to be one of the lists you can pull up and find information on. According to the World Health Organization, in their top 10 list of the ways people to die, accident, sudden illness, and chronic disease kill most people in the world. Accident, chronic disease, and illness. Now, as I looked over this list, I was surprised to find that murder does not make the top 10 ways people die in the world. That really surprised me, especially since here in our country, you hear so much about it all the time. It didn't make the list. But suicide did. Suicide made the list at number 10 of the ways people die in the world. Also not on the list, which really surprised me, were war-related casualties. The World Health Organization didn't count military deaths or at least war-related casualties among. Now, they didn't explain why this is, but I have some suspicions. I suspect it's because it's hard to separate combat deaths from the collateral deaths which happen. People die many years following a conflict, sometimes from things like chemical exposures. We saw that this past week, this week in Washington, all the first responders from the 9/11 tragedy, you know, they are still suffering from long-term exposure to chemicals from that event, and therefore still dying from it. But it's not just things. It's also things like stress-related disorders. PTSD, we hear a lot about that on the news. PTSD, stress, anxiety. Something is causing suicides to rise among the world, and I would suspect that this is one of those reasons. But friends, just because it doesn't make the list does not mean that war does not kill many, many people. It does. According to another study I looked at this week, this one was made public on a website which keeps data, of all sorts of data, and it's called Our World in Data. The number of people killed in war-related incidents since World War II is in the hundreds of thousands. Since 1945, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people have died as a result of armed conflict somewhere in the world. So yeah, war is responsible for a lot of deaths. A lot of deaths. Now, with all of this said, and as you can see, I've thought a lot about this week. With all of this said, death does not define the way one dies. Now, I'm not talking about that event which stops our hearts from breathing, stills our respirations, and ends our brain activity. I'm not talking about that. Death need not define the way we die. For example, how people face their end is equally important. Take these 3 deaths, for example. We have 3 friends. One dies while taking a selfie perched on the edge of a cliff. Happens all the time. People trying to get the perfect shot, and they die. Another friend of ours dies of alcohol poisoning after a night of partying. But still, another friend is hit by a car while pushing a young child out of harm's way. Now, all 3 of these individuals have met an untimely and unfortunate end, right? They've all met an untimely end, but only one of these 3 has died for what we might call a noble cause. Only one has died. Now, saying this doesn't mean that our selfie taker or our partier were bad people. They're not bad people. They're probably very good people. They just made a really silly decision at an unfortunate time. They're not bad people. Neither am I saying that our child-saving hero wasn't a cad. She could have been a horrible person a lot of times, but in the moment when it mattered, she did something amazing. Now, this is not a character indictment one way or the other. But I would say that to perish in the act of preserving someone else points to something deep within us. To perish or to live a life of sacrifice so that you set aside your own interests so that someone else's might be furthered, that points to something a little deeper inside. An unselfish act of courage that follows its path to the end. To live a life so unselfishly, or to have a death that is so unselfish that it follows a larger purpose, has a term. We call that valor. That's what valor is. Valor is the ability to face great danger with firmness and grace. It works hand in hand with courage. Courage. Sorry, wrong placard. Because when I started this, someone asked me, what's the difference between valor and courage? They're the same thing. Well, not exactly. Valor works hand in hand with courage. Courage is the ability to set aside our fear, to act even when we're afraid. But valor enables us not only to act in the midst of our fear, but to act with a purpose, and especially a purpose which is greater than ourselves. It means that we self-sacrifice for something bigger than ourselves. Courage is this. Oh, this is cool. Hold my beer. That's courage. Nothing really good happens after someone says, here, hold my beer, watch this. Very rarely does anything good happen, but that's courage. That's why we'll take a bike and we'll try to jump over a 20-foot, chasm. Or it's liquid courage that keeps emergency rooms in business. Right? That's courage. But valor is, here, hold my beer, I've got to go save that child. That's valor. It goes the next step. Valor enables us to act with a purpose bigger than ourselves. If ever there was a word that described the Bedford boys better, I don't know what it is. We would be hard-pressed to find a word that defines them better. Yes, they were courageous. Yes, they were committed. But the Bedford boys were men of valor. What made them men of valor? Because they knew when they got into those transports to cross that sea, to land on that beach, they not only knew they were going to face an overwhelming enemy, but they were facing an enemy that had to be defeated, a particularly evil enemy. They knew, for example, that Hitler had violated many covenants and treaties, which he had said that he wouldn't invade other countries, he wouldn't take over these countries, but he did. First it was Austria, then it was the Sudetenland, and then it was the invasion of Poland, which started the war, but that wasn't it. He had this insatiable desire to conquer lands. And innocent people fell under the Nazi war machine. They just fell like dominoes before the German war machine. But worse than that, worse than violating a treaty, worse than violating a covenant, Worse than all of that were the reports that began to come out after the war. That there were concentration camps. And then when the Germans would go into the woods and they would take whole villages out and they would murder women and children. And military intelligence had begun to trickle back, and people knew that this was happening. This was an evil on which people had never seen. The Nazis, a Nazi-occupied land, the mass extermination of Jews, and anyone else deemed unworthy by the Nazis were being killed. Something had to be done about this, because what had been whispered about for years was now being confirmed by military intelligence. Therefore, the Allies knew, the Bedford boys knew that they were fighting not just to win a war, but to face such an evil as the world had never known. This wasn't just, I'm going to fight and go home and live a life. No, they were fighting for a purpose, something much bigger than themselves. Fascism, Nazism had to be defeated. The world had to be made safe for democracy. Everybody had to have the same ability to live and breathe freely the way we do. Just because you were born Jewish, or because you were born a gypsy, or because you were born whatever other persecuted minority that the Nazis persecuted, they needed to be able to be free as we were free. This wasn't just a war fought to conquer territory. This wasn't just a war because somebody offended this emperor or that emperor. No. This was a war to destroy evil. "2,000 years before, our ancestors in faith faced a similar evil. The fledgling community of faith, the followers of Jesus, by now they were called Christians, were surrounded by a world that was suspicious of them. They'd been discriminated against. The world had persecuted them because the world didn't understand Christians 2,000 years ago. The known world didn't try to get to understand them. For example, when you come forward and you join this church, you'll make a profession of faith which says, I profess that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and I proclaim him as Lord of my life. That's an ancient profession. People have claimed Jesus Christ as Lord since Jesus ascended into heaven. That's what makes us Christian. Jesus is Lord. But the Gentile world didn't understand that. In the Roman world, there was but one Lord. And his name wasn't Jesus. His name was Caesar. So when Christians proclaimed Jesus as Lord, they were labeled as treasonous. And the Romans rounded them up and put them in jail for it. Well, because it became so dangerous to be a Christian, that what had been house churches, they were worshiping in homes until their neighbors began to inform them and turn on them. And they had to go into hiding. So worship began to happen in catacombs and in cemeteries, places nowhere else would go. Well, then people wondered, well, what kind of weirdos are they that they comport with dead people? And then came the rumor where, they worship a dead person, right? But worse than all of that, the Jews began to spread this horrible rumor that, when they worship, they drink blood and they eat flesh. So these rumors began to all come together, meaning that the persecution of Christians began to intensify, and intensified so badly that they were driven underground. So what were they supposed to do? What were Christians supposed to do? Who would help these Christians? But still the faith wasn't destroyed. You would think that in the middle of these sorts of persecutions, being thrown into jail, losing your homes, losing your community, people stopped doing business with them, they were driven out into the fringes, you would think that the church would shrink, but it began to grow. And then when it began to grow, even in the midst of all of it, that's when they began to murder Christians. And more people were martyred for their faith. Well, into the middle of all of this chaos that I've described, all the rumors and the gossip and the innuendo, the losing the homes, the businesses, the lockup, the persecutions, in the middle of all the chaos, the Lord sent a coded word of consolation. A word, it was written in code, and we call it the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation. You know that last book of the Bible that nobody wants to study because it's so scary? That one. Well, that's a word of, it's good news. The work is coded because the book of Revelation is a dangerous book. Why is it dangerous? Because it predicts the overthrow of the Roman government in favor of Christianity. The book of Revelation, the book of Revelation is about a revolution in which the Christians eventually are going to win over the Romans. Thus, in the book, because it's written in code, Rome's not called Rome, it's called Babylon. The emperor of Rome is the 666 branded Antichrist. So when we think about all that evil Antichrist in 666, well, what it is a description of the Roman emperor. All of those references to enemies of Jesus are described as horrible beasts who are trying to destroy Christians. If the ruling authorities knew how they were being characterized, there would have been even more hell for the Christians to pay. So the book of Revelation was written in code. So let me tell you what it's about. The book of Revelation calls Christians to stand firm in their faith, to be faithful even to the end, just like the church in Smyrna, the one we read about today. Though these people were poor, they were rich in spirit. The Spirit gave them ability to be faithful even to death. Don't worry about when the devil, i.e. Rome, is going to throw you into prison. Don't worry about that. Don't be afraid. Why? Because not only will the Lord conquer the world's evil, those who remain faithful to Him as well will also conquer. And those who are faithful to the end, those who can be faithful to Christ's bigger purpose despite all the world throws at them, they will be people of valor. Because they will be faithful to an end, to a purpose that is larger than themselves. And if you are faithful to the end, we will receive a crown of life. Eternal life is reserved for those. Well, I don't know about you, friends, but thank heavens we don't have to face such persecutions today, right? Goodness gracious, we Americans, we're Americans. We have freedom of religion. That means I am free to come to Bedford Christian Church and worship today, because that's my right. I can go to Temple Bethel, and I can worship at a Jewish synagogue. I can go to a Muslim mosque. Heck, I can even sleep in as an atheist if I wanted to. American. I got the right, and you can't take my right away. Now, to be sure, there are people who live in other places who don't have freedom of religion and are persecuted, and we pray for them. But we're free from all that. We have fought our battles, and we have won our battles. We Christians are the majority in our country. Bully for us. Good news. We're in the majority here. And thanks to the Bedford boys as well. The Bedford boys have made the world safe for democracy, right? So we can all rest easy and choose to worship or not. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that's not true. It is not true. The world is still full of dictators. North Korea's Kim Jong-un, Russia's Vladimir Putin, the Philippines' Rodrigo Duterte, they're just as fickle and often just as brutal as Hitler ever was. Meanwhile, in our own country, the persecutions of the past sound familiar to people today who still suffer for things like racial discrimination, discrimination based on age, disability, sexual orientation, take your pick. There's lots of reasons to discriminate against people in our country. And those who face those discriminations, the persecutions of the past, look mighty familiar. So yes, friends, the world may be safe for democracy, doesn't mean there's not still evil in it. The Bedford boys may have fought, bled, and died to give us our right to worship freely, but that doesn't mean other people don't still have problems. It doesn't mean there aren't still evils to confront, so make no mistake. When we stand up and we fight for the outcast, the marginalized, the discriminated against, fighting today is just as dangerous as it ever was. It is as dangerous as pushing a little girl out in front of a moving car. Standing up for what's right is just as dangerous. Now, what does that mean for you and me? Does it mean we get to come and worship and sing our little hymns and then go to Huddle House feeling pretty good about ourselves? Is that what it means? Is that what our faith is? Is that what 2,000 years of church history has done to us? No. We don't have to guess what we're supposed to be about. No, friends, we have been given models to follow. Jesus himself shows us how to live sacrificially, to advocate for the poor, to welcome the outcast, and to confront authorities on their behalf. Why do you think Jesus overturned the table of money changers when he went into the temple? Did he do it because he didn't like money? Did Jesus do it because he wanted to free the little birdies from the cages? No. You know why Jesus overturned the money changers' tables? Because they were thieves and robbers. The poor would come and the money changers would charge them unfair rates of exchange. They would grease the palms with their rich buddies and then stick it to the poor. Jesus had no problem with the system. It was how they were abusing the system against those who were poor. So Jesus stood up for them in a very dangerous and public way. He didn't sing a hymn and pray for them. He went out and he did something about it. Jesus showed us what it means to confront authorities. And later, when the church itself became a marginalized minority, when followers of Jesus were being discriminated against, the Christians in Smyrna were lauded as people who remained spiritually rich in a world that was plotting its doom. They remained spiritually rich. Now, I know what you're thinking. I was thinking the same thing when I typed the sermon. Pastor, that's Jesus. We ain't Jesus. I can't do what Jesus did. For heaven's sakes, I take Geritol in the morning to get myself out of bed. I ain't overturning no tables nowhere. I can barely make my own bed. And the people in Smyrna, for heaven's sakes, they're all biblical. We can't possibly live up to that kind of righteousness, right? Well, maybe we can't. What if the Bedford boys have said the same thing? What if 75 years ago the Bedford boys and all the other thousands of them with those transports had said to themselves, why are we doing this? We're going to lose this anyway. Why bother? We're going to lose anyway. Why should we make the effort? Well, friends, had they done that, the world would be a much different place today. And I would say to us all in this place today, we cannot dishonor their memory by ignoring their example. We cannot dishonor their memory by ignoring their example. We have got to double down on our efforts to stand up and make this a kinder, gentler world, more equal and more fair for all. From standing in line at Walmart to voting in the ballot box. We have got to find ways to use our freedoms to make the world a better place, a world where the defenseless are defended, the stranger is welcome, and there is dignity for the outcast. That's the kind of world Jesus came. That's the kind of world Jesus advocated for. It's the kind of world Jesus died for. It's the kind of world he rose from the grave for. A place where everyone can live freely with the dignity of knowing what it means to be a child of God. To be sure, friends, to stand up in the face of evil often puts us in opposition to those people in power. But so be it. This is our fight. This is our call. And we must follow it, faithful to the end. Years ago, a friend of mine shared a poem. I'm going to read it to you now. It's a communion meditation. It's called The Dash. Have you heard this before? Okay, act like you haven't heard it. Be surprised. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of birth and spoke of the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time they spent alive on earth, and now only those who love them know what that little line is worth. Where it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that still can be rearranged. To be less quick to anger and show appreciation more and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering that this special dash might only last a little while. So when your eulogy is read and your life's actions to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you lived your dash? Well, friends, it is the dash between our lives, beginning and end, that matters most. Because the sad fact is this, unless the Lord returns first, we are all going to die of something. An accident, illness, perhaps an act of war. And when we're gone, what will people say of us? Well, my prayer is that people will talk most about what was in our hearts. May they remember what was in our hearts, how we treated people, by the way we lived. And the way we died will not matter so much anymore. Because if we don't do this, there is no eternal reward for living a life that is consumed with our own selfish interests. There is no reward by living a life fulfilling our own pursuits over the needs of other people. We will build an empire. We will build a world of cash. We can build a big house and drive fancy cars. We can do all of those things. But if we do it, ignoring the needs of those around us, we will have earned our reward. We'll drive to work every day. And we'll go home to live in it every night. But if we remain faithful, like the church of Smyrna, and live a life of service and sacrifice, then our rewards will have just begun. We will be someone's hero both in this world and next. We will be someone's hero both in this world and in the next. So what is the greater purpose we're going to stand up for today? What is it? What person needs us? Who needs our voice today? What movement needs our signature on a line today? What purpose is greater than us that we will have to sacrifice ourselves to make sure that it is fulfilled? But when we answer that question, friends, don't forget, becoming a hero is dangerous. Becoming a hero is dangerous. The Bedford boys proved that. Becoming a hero is dangerous. But when we, like them, overcome our fears and confront evil faithfully to the end, we will be people of valor too. May we be remembered for that. Amen. Lord, help us today to be courageous, to be committed, to be people of valor, to be committed to something bigger than ourselves that makes the world a better place for someone. Help us, God, to not sit idly by and count our own money and feel good about our own situation, but to reach out and find those people who need our touch, who need more than our prayers, but need our action, and then give us the courage and the commitment to act as you would have us do so. What money changers today need our confrontation? Help us, Lord God, to find them, to act on their behalf, and be people of valor. In Jesus' name we pray.